Okay, so just for your information, I haven't been shaking a lot of hands because I'm on day 2 of my antibiotic. Um, after day 1, my wife's, oh, you've taken it for a whole day, you're good. But I'm trying to maintain a good distance from everybody except Bruce. Bruce is like, what? What? Yeah, okay, so the rundown here. Rosie had back surgery on Monday, and L4 and L5, the doctor said what he did, he went in from her left side through through her hip and thigh and goes in through there, and he had a little, I don't know how they do that stuff. It's like a little tube that goes inside, and it has tools inside, and he goes in and he cleans out between L4 and L5 disc on her back. And he said, and I found out that her back was, she wasn't exactly straight. He said, so I straightened her out. I said, praise the Lord, I paid a doctor to straighten my wife out. So there we go. So she's straight now. And then they put a cage around the vertebrae and then put four screws to hold the cage in place, to hold the vertebrae in place. And so he straightened her out and screwed her up at the same time. I'm happy. Hospitalization, paid for it all. So, yeah, that's the goal. I definitely want her to hear it. So that's it. Yeah, well, she was hurting every time she. I don't know if you saw her, but every time she took a step, it was hurt in the back. Now, since he came in from the side and he came in through the hip, her left leg hasn't been working. So she would get in bed and she'd say, okay, would you lift my left leg for me? Because I don't have control over it right now. And when she got home, she didn't have any control over it. So for the past few days, when she get up and walk, it's getting better. Last night, she got in bed by herself and got her leg, and so it's working better. So she's gradually recovering from the surgery she had. Today, I asked Ronnie on the way to church, I said, hey, do you want to change the bandages today? No, never. Okay, well, I figured. But that's the way it is. So she's doing better. I appreciate your prayers and calls and cards and thanks. Thank you for that. And a lot of people have helped out, and I appreciate it. Paul has taken the offering today, so toss in your money. Remember, we're trying to pay for a night of camp meeting this year, so that's what the offerings are for as we take it to help us pay $1,500 to the church for the camp meeting. So Sean wants to make camp meeting self-sufficient by using us for himself. So last week we started talking about the Old Covenant. The Old Covenant. We talked about it. There's various steps of the Old Covenant and different things. So we talked about the fact that the word covenant means to cut. And we talked about Abraham's covenant with God and how they would cut the animals down the middle and then they'd walk through the blood and stuff. So the covenant was an all-encompassing agreement. The closest comparison we have to it today is marriage. But once a person entered into a covenant in the ancient Middle Eastern world, specifically a blood covenant, he or she could not be released from it, okay? That's why they walked through the blood. They were saying basically, if I break this covenant, may what we did to these animals be done to me. So that was a A covenant. In the culture of Abram, it was common for tribal chiefs or heads of city-states to enter into covenants and alliances with one another. So when God decided to communicate with man, he used the covenant. After the fall of Adam and Eve, the type of Abram, creation had gone astray, you might say. People were going all different directions. I mean, Abram would have come and would have heard of the covenant. He would have heard of the God of the Old Testament, but his family were idol worshipers. Okay? The Bible tells us that they were worshiping idols. Making a covenant would be God's way to demonstrate his love for mankind. So entering into a covenant language that pagan cultures understood. The Old Testament of the Bible is called the Old Covenant. The New Testament is called the New Covenant. So each time there's a cutting involved in the Old Testament, Tom, and in the New Testament, there was some cutting involved in the covenant for us to enjoy. The covenant-making ceremony involved several steps. It was an agreement between two people that was made publicly, and normally covenants were made in open fields before a crowd of witnesses. Now, when I initially did this, Paul Rings was in the class with me. And I have multiple references to Paul Rings, and we'll do that. Let's see. I could use Tom today, I guess, for the illustration purposes. That would probably be well. Step one of this ceremony was the exchange of robes, the exchange of identity. So the covenant partners would change their coats, and the robe was how you identified a person. You look at a person, and by their outer covering is how you identify them. Heaven help. Now, if you saw me coming down the road, coming to church with that coat on, you'd say, well, that's Scotty. That's what he wears. And if you saw Tom coming with his coat on, you'd say, what? That's Tom. That's what he wears. Well, when we exchange robes and we exchange outer garments, it confuses the identity of the people. Okay? You see me, but you see Tom's coat. You say, wait a minute, that's not right. That's Scotty wearing Tom's coat. And people would identify. You haven't seen it. I'm just going to wear this for a while. So I like it. It's kind of comfy. I like the look of it, too. I'd like to find one like this. If someone saw one of the partners from the distance, he might say, hey, here comes Paul Rings or Tom Damery. Wait, it doesn't look like Paul. He's not built like Paul. But isn't that Paul's robe? The exchange of robes represents a confusion of identity. Now, I don't want to do this, but I'll try it. It did not fall. Look at there. Give it time. I don't think it'll go around. I don't think it's going to make it, Tom. I think it'll be hanging loose. Let's see here. I'll hold both sides. How's that sound? Covenant partners would literally trade belts. Now, back in those days, the belts were made differently. They didn't latch. They would put them around. They would tie them or wrap them. And the belts, they were larger, and that the military gear would hang from that. So if they had a sword, now if you remember even in the New Testament, who carried a sword with them? Peter carried a sword. Yeah, oops, lost my belt. I lost Tom's belt. Yeah, I could. I'm afraid I might just leave it on and think it's mine. What's that? Is your name? That's his instrument of yeah. They were larger. The gear would hang there. So when you exchanged the belts, it symbolized the sharing of strengths and assets. Exchanged belts. My covenant partner would be saying to me, Scotty, everything I bring to this relationship is now yours. Everything you have is mine. Our strengths and our assets are combined. We're combining our strengths and our assets. So Tom's saying, Scotty, all my assets are yours. And I've been to his house and I've seen a bunch of cars in the backyard. I'm thinking, yeah. I don't know if they run, but I see them there, okay? And I know that his wife has a really nice Christmas setup. I'm like, oh man, I've always wanted a really nice Christmas setup. And she's got like Christmas little houses and little decorations and stuff. But all assets and all my junk in my basement is all yours now too. So, we got baskets, and now my wife. Well, I'm not going to go because this is getting recorded. So, she's got a new thing she's collecting. So we have exchanged our identity, and we've exchanged our strengths and our assets. Third step, exchange of weapons that hang on the belt. So I would basically give my covenant partner my weapons, and they would give me theirs. All right? So this is telling people, any enemies I have are yours now, and yours are mine. And you say, man, that's kind of sad. No, it's great, because when Tom runs into one of my enemies, I'm going to run to Tom's aid to take him out. And he's going to come to my aid. We're in this together. This is called like allies. Do you know who our allies are? Israel. Israel's our ally. And even the other side, politically speaking, has been taking up for Israel. During this past war, everybody's on Israel's side because Israel has always been on our side. Allies. There's a thing with allies. The British government used to be our number one enemy back in the 1700s. They're an ally now. They're on our side. They fight for us. We fight for them. That's the covenant-making process. My covenant partner would be saying, Scotty, if anybody comes against you, she is going to have to get through me first, because we're now partners, and my task is to protect you. And I would be his protector as well. Fourth step, we sacrifice animals. The animal must be cut. Normally, a heifer is laid on its back and sliced down to the underside of its belly, and its legs folded out. There's one time in my life, Tom, and I told Paul this, that I saw a cow laying on its back with its legs straight up in the air. And that was back in the blizzard of 77, 78. And our school bus went by a farm, and all the beef was frozen in the field, standing. And so when they were bringing the cattle out to the road because they were all dead, they were frozen with their legs straight up in the air. And it was so weird to me. But this is basically what they're talking about. They would kill the animal and slice it down the middle. Now, understand, back in those days, their swords were quite sharp. And have you ever seen that TV show Pawn Stars? When they have a samurai sword, the guy comes in and he takes it out and he cleans it up and sharpens it, and it's razor sharp, and he holds a piece of paper up and he goes, and it slices it. I'm like, that's unbelievable. They would take that sword and cut it down the middle and lay its legs to the side. And yeah, that was, oh, well, let's go on. I'm getting ahead of myself, I think. The sacrifice of the animal is why we call this covenant a blood covenant. Every time a blood covenant was made, a sacrifice was needed. A life must be given and the blood must be shed. When God asked Abram to get a heifer, Abram didn't say a heifer. I wanted a contract. What about my land you promised? Well, Abram knew that a heifer was a contract, and it was an irrevocable contract. The fifth step is what they call the walk of death. Now, in the walk of death, this is where you've taken the animals and you've laid them aside, you've cut them in half, and basically on a roadway, you've cut the animals, laid their parts to the sides. And think about this. If you've killed an animal and you've split him in half, and he's laying on opposite sides of the road, the only thing that's going to be in the road is blood. There's going to be blood everywhere. You're going to be walking in blood basically about ankle deep because you're killing multiple animals to make this happen. And when you walk in it, they didn't have shoes, they had sandals. So with the sandals on, walking through the blood, the sandals are completely encased and covered in blood. Your feet, your toes, your ankles, everything's covered in blood. There's blood everywhere. It's a mess. And so what do? The partners, they stand before each other in an open field, and the animals laying between them. They literally walk through the mass of blood. One would walk through and come back on the left side. The other would walk through and come back on the right side. And together, they made a figure 8. The sixth step in this process was called a striking of hands. In a striking of hands, I mentioned this before, they would cut the palms of their hands. Now, the palm of the hand in those days came down to about here. So they would cut anywhere in here just enough to bring the blood out, not enough to kill the person. They're not slicing their wrists to see if they can die. They're cutting just enough to bring blood out. And when they do that, they're going to, in essence, shake hands. But they're going to shake hands like this. All right? Now, if you're shaking hands this way, the wrists are going to come together. And what happens to the blood? It intermingles. That means we're in a blood contract. We have joined together, and this is a blood covenant between me and another person. Now, you don't just, we use friend very lightly today. Oh, who's that? Oh, it's my friend. Back in those days, in order to be a friend, you would slice the wrist to become a friend with somebody. So today, can you count on your right hand how many real friends you would have? Huh? You wouldn't have as many friends today as as you call people today. Honestly, it was a striking of hands. The wrist, like I said, in the Hebrew culture, the hand includes what we would call the wrist. So the covenant partners made a decision on the wrist, and they put the wrist together and mingle the blood, and this is called the striking of hands. Well, let's see. I get plenty of time. Some traditions said in the modern way of waving your hand in a greeting or shaking hands to show the covenant mark. By doing so, one person let another know that they had a covenant partner. So, okay, so that suggests that the handshaking. Yeah, okay. The two individuals would clasp the hands as the blood flowed between them, and the covenant mark, notice this, might be what's referred to in Isaiah 49:16. Behold, I have graven thee upon the palms of my hands. So this is literally from the Bible, from Isaiah. The seventh step, oh, I like this one. This is one of the best parts. In the covenant making process is the pronouncement of blessings and cursings. Yes, sir.
What motivates this making a covenant with somebody?
Because
you're pals and you want to join forces, or what? Was that the whole deal?
that is exactly right.
And then my second question would be: is if you and Tom have a covenant, if I make a covenant with you, can you make a covenant with more than one person?
Yes.
And does that mean you join forces?
You can make
They talk together.
covenants.
I'm thinking of like the Godfather and the Mafia, really.
Exactly. You can make multiple covenants each time you cut.
Who was it you said had all the scars and they were actually?
A guy, there's a guy. His name was Dr. Stanley. He was a missionary, and he went into Africa. And as he went into Africa, he made multiple cuts. So he did it with every time he came to a tribe, he would do this again and again. And you can read about this in a book called The Blood Covenant by H. Clay Trumbull. And I quote him often because it's a thick book. And he talks about every time that he did that, he cut again and made a scar. And after he had been to about 40 or 50 guys, and he would come in and he would wave at the chief, the people would bow down before him. They never tried to cause problems for him because they saw the scars. And I say this to you to say, when Jesus comes back someday and he waves his hands, we see the scars, and say, hey, that's my covenant partner. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the partners face each other and they say these words. So long as you keep the terms of this covenant, blessed shall ye be when you go out, when you come in. Blessed shall ye be when you rise up and when you lay down. Blessed shall be your wife. Blessed shall be your children. Blessed shall be all that you put your hands to. And because the culture revolved around an agricultural economy, he would say, blessed shall be your oxen and your donkeys and your fields and the produce of your fields. And after he said that, and he would say, but if you violate the terms of this covenant, cursed shall you be when you rise up and lay down. Cursed shall be your wife, your children, your oxen, your donkeys, and your land. You're going to be cursed. There'll be a curse on you. And he would go on. And you go on, and when he ended, the partner would pronounce the same cursings and blessings, and these pronouncements signified that two people were entering into oneness. The eighth step of the covenant was a meal. So they would sit at a table and enjoy a meal together. But you didn't feed yourself. Your partner fed you. Like mashing a cake into what? That's, everybody wonders, where does stuff come from? It comes from the covenant ceremony. That's what marriage comes from. It's a covenant. It's a covenant. So when you mash the cake, that's part of the covenant. But anyway, you would feed the other person. You would feed the other person. I can imagine, Michael, if I was at a covenant meal, I would try to, I know how I like to eat, and I would be shoving food, shoveling it in. Tom would be like chewing as fast as he could, and I'd be like, come on, man, this is city barbecue. Eat more, all right? I'd be cooking it up. We'd get it all cooked up. Then I'd start feeding him. He'd start feeding me. And I'd say, come on, Tom, let's go faster. They didn't feed themselves. They fed each other the first few bites, saying, as you're ingesting this food, you're ingesting me, and you're taking me into your life. And there's a thing there about the bride and groom. But as you're ingesting this food, you're ingesting me. Have you ever heard that before? Have you ever heard that concept before? Say it. Say it, Tom.
Lord's Supper.
Take this food, what you eat, part of my body.
This is my body. This is my body. It's a covenant meal, all right? This isn't something that Jesus just dreamed up to say. He said it for a purpose. We don't always see that purpose because we're Westerners, they were Easterners. They thought they did things different. That's why I'm talking about this stuff in Sunday school. I want you to see it's different. The ninth step is the exchange of names. So the partners would stand each other in the open field and they would take names, and so I would add Tom's name to my name. And he would add my name to his name. So he would no longer be Tom Damon, he'd be Tom Scotty Damon. And I'd be Scotty Tom Bumgarner. We would exchange names. We'd change names. Like I said, Paul Riggs, I'd say, Paul, in order to let my enemies know who my partner is, I'll take your name into my name, put it in the middle of mine. No longer will I be known as Scotty. I'll be known as Scotty Rings Bumgarner. Scotty Rings Bumgarner. I like that. This is nice. Has a nice ring to it. Yeah. Good Lord. And my partner would take my name and say Paul Bumgarner Rings. So every time my name is pronounced, it tells the people who my covenant partner is with. In the past, I stopped at the exchange of names until I read further in the book. And I found there's something else there. But anyways, the name change is what God did with Abraham. So he put A-H from Jehovah. The A-H goes into the middle of Abraham's name. So instead of Abram, it's Abraham. Okay? He changed his name. The A-H from Jehovah, the name appears approximately 6,800 times in the Old Testament. God doesn't stop there. He takes Abraham's name. And from this point on, he calls himself the God of Abraham. When Abraham has a son, he's the name of Abraham, the God of Abraham and Isaac. And then Jacob. So God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You ever read that before? It's the covenant process. God wants you to know they call him God. If he is their God, then they are his people. And he says, I'm going to recognize myself in this covenant, okay? And I know I'm getting late, but I've got to finish this out. What's that? Names change. Simon changes to Peter. Saul to Paul. The name changes. I think it's a little different, but it's similar. Yeah.